The evening was quiet, the sun sliding behind the tree line as the sleek car rolled up to the private gate of a sprawling mansion. The iron bars, high and ornate, glinted faintly in the fading light. From behind them, a small group of HOA board members stood with clipboards in hand, chatting casually until the black man behind the wheel stepped out. He wasn't loud nor impatient. He simply pressed the fob, waiting for the gate to recognize him. But before he could move further, one of the HOA members, a man in his 50s with a sharp tie and a sharper tongue, stepped directly into his path. "Excuse me," the man barked, scanning him up and down like he was a stranger trespassing. "What are you doing here?" The homeowner frowned lightly, keeping his voice calm. "Unlocking my gate. I live here." He gestured toward the sprawling property beyond, the iron bars, the home he had worked for, earned, and built a life inside. The HOA member snorted, then laughed. "This is your house?" His words drew chuckles from the others, who had gathered closer now, peering with folded arms. No, I don't think so. This is a private community. Owners only. Guests need permission." The man's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. "I'm not a guest. This is my property. My name is on the deed." But they didn't listen. Another HOA member leaned forward, her lips pursed. "We've never seen you at the meetings. You don't belong here. Residents in this neighborhood put in the work. They don't just show up like this." The words hung heavy. The undertone wasn't subtle. From a few houses down, neighbors peeked through curtains. Someone even stepped onto the lawn, arms folded, reassured by the little crowd forming behind the HOA line. It wasn't a casual questioning anymore. It had become a performance, dripping with condescension and accusation. The man stood firm, calm but steady, his keys still in his hand. "I don't need your permission to walk through my own gate," the HOA president scoffed, whispering loudly enough for others to hear. "People like you don't own homes like this." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Some nodded in agreement, others uncomfortable but too timid to object. The weight of those words hit like a stone. But instead of reacting, the man simply exhaled slowly. His eyes stayed sharp, his stance unshaken. He knew something they didn't. And as the HOA smirked at their assumed victory, he simply said, "You've just made a serious mistake." They laughed again. But that laughter wouldn't last long. The HOA president adjusted his tie, emboldened by the murmurs of agreement rising behind him. He tapped his clipboard like a gavel, his posture rigid with authority he thought he truly held. "You need to leave," he said flatly, his voice carrying just enough for the crowd of neighbors to hear. "We'll call security, or the police if necessary. What you're doing is trespassing." The man's eyebrows lifted subtly, almost amused by the absurdity of being called a trespasser on his own property. "This is my gate, my home," he repeated. "Everything beyond those bars belongs to me. The deed says so, the mortgage says so, and the county registry says so. You don't." But his calm was wasted on them. Another HOA member, a woman with arms crossed tightly, eyes narrowed, cut in. "Funny, owners in this community actually participate. They attend monthly HOA meetings, they volunteer. You? Never seen you once." The crowd behind her chuckled, some nodding, feeding off the hostility in the air. They didn't care about facts. They cared about appearances, about perception, about dominance. "Here's what's going to happen," the president said smugly, stepping right up to the bars. "You're going to turn around, get back into your car, and leave now, because if we make this official, it won't end well for you." The man inhaled deeply, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. Still, he didn't raise his voice. "If you make this official," he said, "you'll regret it much sooner than I will." That only elicited fresh laughter. They mistook his warning for bluff. "Listen to him," one HOA member sneered, digging for another laugh. "Like he's going to march an army in here." A murmur of agreement rolled through the small crowd now forming, neighbors stepping out of their homes, eager for entertainment, eager to see the humiliation of someone they decided didn't belong. One man from the back, emboldened by the mob, shouted, "Yeah, this isn't your neighborhood." Another voice echoed, "We don't want your kind here." The sting of those words laced the evening air with venom. But the man stood rooted, his hand still loosely gripping his keys, his expression unreadable. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He simply tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing, gaze fixed calmly on the group in front of him. "You've said enough," he murmured at last. And though they didn't understand it yet, those 3 words were not surrender. They were a warning that within minutes, the world around this gate, their smug certainty, their false authority, would come crumbling down. The evening air hung heavy with smug laughter. The HOA members were practically glowing in their false authority, their words echoed by the murmurs of the neighbors who had gathered like vultures around the gate. The man, silent and still, stood firm, a picture of calm in the chaos. Then a low rumble cut through the noise. At first it was faint, the sound of engines in the distance. But it grew louder, closer. The laughter began to die down, replaced by confused glances as dark SUVs appeared at the end of the street, their tinted windows reflecting the fading sunset. 3, then 4, then 5. They rolled in smoothly, stopping just outside the gate. Their presence alone sent unease crawling through the crowd. The SUVs were not ordinary cars. They carried weight, precision, purpose. The door of the lead vehicle opened with a heavy click, and out stepped a figure dressed in tactical gear. Not just one, several. Men and women, clad in military fatigues, boots striking the pavement with sharp certainty. Their movements were synchronized, disciplined in a way that turned heads instantly. Across their uniforms, patches glinted faintly. Special operations. A ripple of shock spread through the crowd. The very people who had scoffed minutes before now whispered nervously, their curiosity laced with fear. The HOA president's smirk faltered. What is this?" he muttered, his voice catching in his throat. The man at the gate finally moved, stepping forward slightly. His expression was steady, his presence commanding now as he gestured casually toward the team approaching. "This," he said, his voice low but carrying, "is who I am." As if on cue, one of the operators moved in, saluting firmly. "Sir," the soldier said with crisp respect. "We came as soon as you called." Gasps escaped the crowd. "Sir." The word cut sharply through every ounce of doubt lingering in the air. The HOA members froze completely now. No more laughter, no more dismissive sneers. They weren't looking at a man they thought didn't belong in their neighborhood. They were staring at a leader, one with authority, discipline, and people who would move mountains at his command. The soldiers spread slightly, forming a protective arc around him. Boots slammed into the concrete in unison as the street fell utterly silent. Gone was the smug arrogance. In its place, fear, awe, and shame. And the black man they had humiliated stood taller than ever, his truth undeniable, his silence transformed into thunder. The silence was suffocating. A moment ago, the HOA stood smug and loud. Now they seemed smaller, shrinking back from the gate as the special ops crew stood tall in tactical formation. The only sound was the synchronized rhythm of boots on pavement and the low hum of the SUV engines, left idling at the curb. The lead operator remained by his side, waiting for orders. The man, calm and collected, looked from one HOA member to the next, his eyes sharp, reflecting none of the rage they had tried to provoke, only an unshakable authority. "I told you," he said simply, his voice even but edged with weight. "This is my home." The HOA president's skin flushed red. He fumbled with his clipboard, stammering. Well, there's been a misunderstanding. We were only trying to verify." The man's eyebrow arched slightly. "Verify?" He let the word hang there, heavy. "You didn't want to verify. You wanted to deny. You didn't ask questions. You made accusations." The words dropped like stones, and the crowd of neighbors behind them lowered their eyes. Even those who hadn't spoken a word now carried the shame of their silence. One of the soldiers stepped forward, speaking loud enough for all to hear. "Sir, we've secured the perimeter. No one here poses any threat. Say the word, and we'll escort you through." Another wave of gasps swept through the crowd. "Escort? Perimeter?" They flicked their eyes between the soldiers and the man they had mocked, as if seeing him for the first time. He didn't need their submission. Their fear already said enough. But before walking through the gates, he turned back, giving them the one lesson they would never forget. "Let this be clear," he said firmly. "Ownership doesn't need your approval. Respect isn't something you give out selectively. Next time you try to humiliate someone, he paused, scanning their stunned faces. Remember what it felt like to stand here and realize you were wrong. No one said a word. The president's lips trembled, but no excuses came out. The smug laughter that had filled the air was now a void he could never take back. The man gave a slight nod to his team. Instantly, 2 soldiers moved forward, the heavy gates unlocking and swinging open without hesitation. He walked through calmly, boots clicking against the stone driveway, his crew falling in step behind him. The HOA remained frozen outside, diminished, silent. The very gate they had used to block him now closed behind him, locking them out while he stepped into the home he had always owned. It wasn't anger that lingered on the street. It was something far heavier: shame, respect, and the memory of the man they tried to belittle, who left them powerless with nothing more than truth.